Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome back to the Ag Committee, Mr. Secretary. On behalf of my farmers and ranchers, I just want to say thanks for you being a strong voice at the White House, interacting with the administration, especially where the EPA meets agriculture. The EPA reached out to USDA for comments on atrazine mitigation practices on March 1st, 2022. Your Office of Pest Management recommended EPA add additional mitigation practices and augment some others. In the proposed rule ultimately published by the EPA, none of the edits, let me say it again, none of the edits or suggested mitigations from USDA were involved or included. EPA similarly hasn't considered your comments on rodenticides as well as chlorpyrifos. Considering EPA is refusing to meaningfully consider USDA OPMP's comments, would you support legislative action requiring them to respond to your career experts on pesticide issues publicly in the Federal Register?
I think it's important to have a respectful relationship between two agencies, Senator. I think it's important for us to continue to have the opportunity to provide input in terms of the impact of whatever EPA is considering. I would hope that under circumstances they would consider the career folks at USDA because they come with good information and good data. I think it's be interesting to see how you would craft that in terms of one department basically overruling another department. I'm not sure I want the EPA telling me how to run the Department of Agriculture, so I just be careful in terms of how you.
Do you feel like the EPA is listening to your experts?
I think they are in some circumstances. There's an honest dispute and disagreement from time to time, and the response that I have to that, Senator, is when there is a disagreement and EPA enacts whatever they're going to enact, then it's our job at USDA to do what we can to mitigate the consequence of that, to use the resources, the programs that we have, if possible, to mitigate the consequences.
So in order to utilize environmentally sound practices like no-till farming, which we've been doing for over 20 years on our family farm, we have to have use of these pesticides. Otherwise, we're going to have to go back to plowing, which creates an increased carbon footprint. Do you feel like the EPA is balancing this issue of carbon footprint? So they're using their practices. We're going to have to plow the ground, which we know is a huge carbon sink.
We have raised that issue with them repeatedly.
And what do they say?
They have a disagreement with us, Senator.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you. Next question. Before the 8th Circuit, attorneys for the Justice Department suggested that USDA are not experts on the uses of pesticides. They use this argument to try to convince the 8th Circuit judges to ignore a letter you sent to former Representative Hartzler and members of Congress standing by the science of pesticides. Specifically, as your department is working with USTR to end the GMO ban by Mexico, do statements like these harm your efforts to advocate for American farmers?
It makes it difficult because it creates confusion.
Appreciate that. Next question is about the CCC discretionary fund. About a year ago, we sent a letter to the GEO with our farmers' concerns. These are not my concerns. These are my farmers' concerns about the way the USDA has been using the CCC. Well, I'm still waiting on the response. I'm worried that the Farm Bill negotiations will be hindered, especially if you believe that the USDA can use the CCC for programs that we ultimately decide not to include in the Farm Bill. How can we be confident in negotiating in good faith if USDA continues to create programs without congressional approval under CCC discretionary fund use?
Well, to be clear, Senator, we don't create programs without making sure that they fall within the direction that Congress has provided in creating the CCC. For example, when we did the partnership initiative, it is focused on creating market opportunities, which is clearly within the purview of the CCC as established by Congress. So we're not working outside the bounds of what you all have created and directed CCC to do. And I'll tell you, it is an incredibly wonderful tool to respond to things like a need for fertilizer, the need for us to expand production of fertilizer here in the U.S. CCC is giving us the opportunity to create resources that will allow us to be more self-reliant on fertilizer and hopefully over time reduce the cost of that to producers. So we're very careful to stay with, well, there are two issues here. We're very careful to stay within the statutory language that authorizes the CCC expenditures, and we never, ever, ever put at risk the Farm Bill programs that require CCC funding.
So certainly, again, we agree on the same goals. We certainly believe that, fertilizer costs are a huge input problem right now. The number one driver of that is the cost of energy. But certainly, our farmers and ranchers feel like how you're using the CCC is outside of the law. And I think that we need to be able to better understand that.
Senator, with all due respect, when we did the Partnership for Climate Smart Agriculture initiative, we had the Farmer and Rancher and the Food Alliance, which was made up of the major commodity groups, Farm Bureau, National Farmers Union, corn growers, soybean growers. In fact, they are participating as participants in this effort, say to us two things. One, Mr. Secretary, do this. Do it in a voluntary, incentive-based, market-based way. And two, Mr. Secretary, fund it through the CCC. These are the major farm organizations telling us how to fund this.
I appreciate that. Last one is on trade. Yesterday, the Senate confirmed a new ambassador to India. We're lacking strong trade agreements with India, EU, and the UK right now. And this administration's not asked Congress for a new TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, as well. What concrete steps have you taken or do you intend to take to convince the administration to open up new markets for American agriculture, especially when your department is predicting a record agriculture trade deficit?
Well, to be clear, the last 2 years we've had record exports in agriculture. And I think it's important for
because
us.
of commodity prices, but go ahead.
Well, nevertheless, they're records.
Yeah.
And the challenge, I think, is to build trust in this country in trade. Agriculture, farmers understand the importance of trade because of historic surpluses. They understand it. They appreciate it, but that's not true of all industries and not all parts of the country. There are folks who believe that trade is not.
So do you have any concrete steps that you can let us know what's happening on the trade side of agriculture?
Sure. There's the framework, the Indo-Pacific framework. There are negotiations with the EU on a variety of SBS issues. There's the issue involving Canada and trying to make sure that they live up to the USMCA with dairy. There's the issue in Mexico in terms of the ability to assure that biotech corn can be used. There are tariff reductions in Vietnam that resulted in more pork sales. There are additional issues in Central American countries where we have created additional opportunities. There's a whole variety of things going on in the trade front that don't necessarily require free trade agreements, but they do require breaking down barriers. They do require restoring trust. They do require saying when we have a trade agreement, we're going to enforce it. And that's precisely what we're doing with the USMCA.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.